Okay, we are ready to start. My name is Peter Maravellis, and on behalf of City Lights Booksellers, I would like to welcome you to City Lights Live, the virtual reading series that continues in the footsteps of our in-store calendar, which was inaugurated during the shelter in place. We continue to celebrate the works of authors we know and love with readings, discussions, and forums throughout the month of June and into August. It has been 14 weeks since the lockdown was imposed. We are happy to say that City Lights has finally reopened its doors to the public this week. Following health department guidelines, we aim to make our reopening as safe and as pleasant as possible for the public and our workers. Please do come by and visit us. You'll be able to once again browse our stacks. We do ask that you do wear a mask, though. Our business hours will be Monday through Saturday from 12 noon through 8 p.m. Our entrance, I should note, is now on the Broadway side of the building. It's at 271 Columbus. The original entrance is now an exit only. So as many of you know, City Lights is a publishing house as well as a bookstore. Throughout the month of June, we're offering 7 free ebooks of anti-racist publications produced by our publishing arm. This is offered in a spirit of solidarity with all who are joining the collective fight for a better and more equitable world. These titles include such works as Julian Bond's Selected Works, a Bayard Rustin biography called Troublemaker for Justice, and a newly released title from Hilary Moore and James Tracy called No Fascist USA, as well as numerous other titles. So please do check them out. They are free. You can go to the website. It's www.citylights.com. So this evening, we are delighted to have back with us once again Greil Marcus. As many of you know, he is one of our nation's most important cultural critics, the author of numerous seminal books, which include Mystery Train, Lipstick Traces, The History of Rock and Roll in 10 Songs, as well as others. With Werner Sollers, he is the editor of the New Literary History of America. So tonight, we will be celebrating the release of his new book, Under the Red, White, and Blue, Patriotism, Disenchantment, and the Stubborn Myth of the Great Gatsby. It is published by Yale University Press. In it, Mr. Marcus performs a kind of a forensic study of F. Scott Fitzgerald's vision of the American dream as found in The Great Gatsby. So there are a couple of other additional books that I'd like to mention that recently came out. There's a newly published and fully illustrated edition of Mystery Train, and from the British Film Institute, The Manchurian Candidate, a treatment from the legendary John Frankenheimer political thriller. So all these books can be purchased tonight by clicking the button at the bottom of your screen. So joining Mr. Marcus tonight in conversation is going to be Justin Desmangles. Justin is the chairman of the board of the Before Columbus Foundation, administrator of the American Book Award. He also serves on the Literary Council of the Oakland Book Festival. He is the host of the radio broadcast New Day Jazz, now in its 15th year. His poetry and journalism have appeared in Americana, also in Black Renaissance Noir, Drum Voices Review, and Conch. So tonight's discussion is going to be followed by a Q&A. We request that you use the Ask a Question function found on the center bottom of your screen to ask questions. So welcome to you all to City Lights Live.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Greil, so wonderful to be with you.
We're getting incredible feedback, so I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I just said it's nice to be with you. It's
Huh.
wonderful to be with you. Not sure where
A gremlin has invaded.
So Justin, why don't you turn down your volume a little?
I see. How's that?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay, that sounds wonderful.
How am I? I'm okay, right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
You're doing fine, Greil. Yeah,
Okay.
you're doing good.
Okay, good.
Well, Greil, we don't have too much time, so I'd like to start with that tuning fork that had been struck upon a star. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, like Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man or many of the plays by August Wilson, is really a song, a great inspired piece of music. I think if one regards the United States of America as a larger symphonic work, then surely The Great Gatsby is one of its primary musical motifs, as essential to that larger composition as the Tristan chord is to Wagner's work. I think The Great Gatsby is a music that might best be described as Afro-Celtic. By that, I mean it has the melodies and the songs of the Celtic ring that we might hear with Yeats or Joyce, but also the syncopations, the measures, and the polyrhythms of the great African American music we know today as jazz. Perhaps this is a good place to begin. Uh, Afro-Celtic music in The Great Gatsby, the syncopations, the measures, the uniqueness of that hybrid that is indeed so much a part of the American culture that's captured there. Could you talk to us a little bit about the music of The Great Gatsby?
I don't think that really became clear to me. It became an element of the book that I hadn't really understood or recognized before until I saw the theatrical production Gats. And this is something that has been playing in the United States since 2000. My younger daughter saw it in Minnesota where it had its premiere, called me up and said, you cannot, end your life without seeing this. And I got a chance a few years later to see it in New York. And it starts out with a bunch of people in an office, and a guy, his computer isn't working, he can't do any work. And he finds a copy of The Great Gatsby in a box on his desk. He just a dog-eared copy. And he picks it up and he just starts reading it aloud to kill the time until he can, computer guy can come and fix his computer and he can get to work. And he's reading out loud, and people are going through their ordinary business in the office, doing this and they're doing that. As it goes on, over the 6 hours it takes to read every word in The Great Gatsby, the various people in the office and people who come and go become different characters in the book, and they actually begin to speak their own dialogue. Whereas Scott Shepherd, the guy who picks up the book in the first place, it always takes Nick's part, Nick Carraway, the narrator, but often he's reading descriptive passages. He's reading other people's dialogue too. It's back and forth and back and forth. At the very end of the book, in the last, maybe 20 pages of the book, that's when, with Fitzgerald, the sentences are set up to echo each other. There are certain words planted. They're going to go off like bombs in the last page or two of the book. There are themes that are introduced or images that are introduced that are going to get bigger and acquire more weight as these last 20, 25 pages go on. And as Scott Shepherd is there and all the other characters have dropped away, all the other actors are gone from the stage, and it's only him there, and he's sitting on a table in this ratty-looking office. He puts the book down and he begins to recite or simply muse the last several pages of the book. I'm sitting there in my seat and I realize that my foot is tapping. And he had brought out the syncopation you're talking about. He had brought out the jazz. He had brought out the rhythms in the last pages of the book in a way that was, I was just shocked by. And that's why when I finished the chapter in the book that it's about Gats, it's called Reading the Book, because there's some guy reading the book on stage, but also it allows me or anybody else to read the book in a new and different way. Be attentive to its rhythms, be attentive to its style, not so much its story, not even its dialogue, I ended that chapter with several pages about Jolie Roll Morton's Mamie's Blues. He said was the first blues song he ever heard, going back to somewhere around 1900. And it had the same syncopation, it seemed to me. That's how I heard it, as the last 20 some pages of The Great Gatsby. And I thought, these people are talking to each other. Jolie Roll Morton was there in 1925 when Fitzgerald was writing his book. They were all part of the same conversation.
Yeah. It's a very interesting technique that Fitzgerald employs, because part of what we find in jazz and blues music is a point of view on tradition, the popular songs, say, where it's disassembled and reconfigured as a critique of popular song into the present time, gathering the elements of that earlier composition and making use of them all, not throwing anything out, but reconfiguring them in a way that really illuminates that present time. And Fitzgerald does that too, doesn't he?
Well, he does that, but he is looking back. He's writing this book in 1924 and 1925. He's setting up the story in 1922, which for him is the apogee of the jazz age, of an explosion of cultural, sexual, musical energy that transformed the country. And he's already looking back from 1925, because this was always his perspective, as something that's gone, that's not there anymore. That was the now a younger generation has completely superseded his. He's writing about 1922, 3 years later, as if it's decades gone. It's just remarkable. So, in that sense, when there is that kind of yearning for a disappearing past, I don't want to say the word nostalgia. It's something much stronger, much more desperate and tortured and conflicted than that. Yearning for a disappearing past. That's when strains of music come in, because you are singing your own song that no one else is ever going to hear. That's your feeling. Obviously, if you're a novelist, you hope everyone will hear it and actually hear the tune.
One of the elements that emerges throughout Gatsby, throughout Fitzgerald's work, that really saturates American life and has for some time, for many centuries, even prior to the Declaration of Independence, is the idea of passing, of whether it's racial or whether it has to do with class, not so much pretending to be something one isn't, but rather wearing a series of masks and playing a series of roles in order to achieve a unique and personal destiny. And Jimmy Gatz, the Great Gatsby, in that sense, presents a very salient description of the United States as a culture. Would you agree that that's fair to say?
Well, in a way, yes, and in a way, no. I don't know that it's a question of masks, and I don't know that it's a question of taking on serial identities. I think this sense of finding yourself in America or going to America to be free has much more to do with becoming who you feel you really are. In other words, you're born into poverty. You're born into class oppression. You're born into a family that has no books in the house, whatever it might be. And you say to yourself, that's not me. These people can't be my parents. They don't understand who I really am. My friends think, I'm never going to leave this little town. I'm just going to live my whole life here. They think they know everything about me. They don't know me at all. So the sense that you come to America or you're already here and you give yourself a new name. And it's not like you adopt someone else's identity. And it's not, I understand what you mean about passing. And Coleman Silk, of Philip Ross, The Human Stain, who was very, very much a Gatsby figure,
Yes.
is passing in the conventional sense. He is considered a Negro, even though his skin is white, and he passes as a Jew his entire adult life.
Right.
But really what Philip Roth is getting at is every day, he says, you woke up as someone you created yourself to be. That every day you said, I'm me. Nobody else knows it. Nobody else even understands that that I became who I was meant to be. So there is something more mystical than transactional. I'm passing because I want to live in a white world and I won't be subject to the kind of, humiliations and oppressions, and even the everyday threat of death that I would be facing if I were Black. It's more like somebody Black born into a world, born into a family where nobody recognizes, nobody honors his or her aspirations, his or her sense of self. Don't get above your raisin. Don't put yourself above the people who brought you into this world. What do you think you're doing? And this person says, that's not me. I'm something more than this. And so I'm going to leave. I'm going to go somewhere where nobody knows me. Nobody's heard of me. I'm going to give myself a new name, but it will be my real name, the name I should have always been called.
Gentlemen, I hate to interrupt. Could I have the two of you check to see if you maybe have two browsers window open? Justin, might you have more than one browser window open?
I don't.
Because we're getting feedback from you.
Because I see Justin and I just see our two faces.
Yeah, but we're getting feedback from Justin. So I'm wondering, could you check the bars and see if maybe you have two windows open?
No, I don't.
Okay. Alrighty, we'll go with it then. We were getting some complaints. It's okay.
Is that right? How's that?
It's still echoing.
Yeah, it doesn't look like I do. We did, and now we don't. Or we did for a moment, but now it's gone.
Okay, we'll roll with that.
Shall we continue?
Let's give it a try. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to hold on to what you're talking about there and pivot just slightly to a similar description that came from Albert Murray in his book, The Omni-American. And surely if there ever was an Omni-American, it is definitely Jay Gatsby. And one of the descriptions that Murray offers of Gatsby is a parallel to William Faulkner's Joe Christmas, who also sometimes of his own volition, sometimes inadvertently passes for white, but is always sensing not exactly a sense of imposter fear, but rather that there is an inevitable confrontation when the gig is up and he's found out. That kind of tension, it seems to me as a reader, is notably absent from Gatsby, who seems to be supremely self-confident of his incarnation, of his will to be exactly, to go back to your phrase, who he really is.
Well, I don't know. There is that scene near the end of the book in the Plaza Hotel when Daisy and Nick and Tom Buchanan, Gatsby are all there. And Tom Buchanan, who was probably one of the 10 richest men in the country, this enormous football playing, polo playing thug, a thug in his brain and a thug in his body and a thug in his entire being, exposes Jay Gatz and says, you're just a cheap crook. You're just a cheap bootlegger. You'll never be like us. It's not that he knows his family background, that is really born Jimmy Gatz in North Dakota. He doesn't know any of that. Doesn't matter. He knows, in his mind, this guy's a fraud. And when he does this unmasking, well, in the book, you can read it any number of ways, and it doesn't seem as violent, anywhere near as violent as it does in Baz Luhrmann's film adaptation from 2013 of The Great Gatsby. There you see Joel Edgerton as Tom Buchanan, just a frighteningly intense actor, and Leonardo DiCaprio as Gatsby. And Edgerton just takes him apart. It's almost as if he's giving him a physical beating, and DiCaprio is responding as if he's being beaten. And so you see this destruction, how fragile the identity that you create for yourself can be. It's not that the mask is ripped off. It's that the true self that you discovered and that you have lived out has suddenly been dissolved as if by acid.
It's a very powerful scene there in the Plaza Hotel, and Tom quickly returns to his paranoia about race mixing. I think it's interesting to note that Fitzgerald's descriptions of Gatsby often refer to his skin as brown. He doesn't suggest that Gatsby is of mixed race or a black man, but in the extraordinary use of color throughout, getting back to that Afro-Celtic element, it is Gatsby who is always brown, and who Tom refers to as Mr. Nobody from Nowhere in that particular scene. And
Right,
he begins to worry again his own paranoia about race mixing. Could you offer a little commentary about that, which is to say the least, ultra contemporary iteration here with Fitzgerald?
Yeah, I mean, I remember talking about this book, my own book, with Joyce Carol Oates, and she had read an early draft, and we were walking. She used to live in Berkeley every spring, and we would go for long walks. And at one point I said something, I don't remember what, and she said, "Well, of course he's Jewish." I said, "He is?" Meaning Gatsby. She said, "Well, obvious." She said, "Completely obvious. Of course." I said, "Well, gee, it wasn't obvious to me." But it was to her. And there's certainly a sense of otherness, a sense of differentness that so many readers have taken from this book. And I think that's one of the reasons why adaptations, whether they're literary, whether they're musical, whether they're cinematic, where people dive back into this material and redo it, they do damage to it, they distort it, they bring their own perspective to it, or they take it as a master story that's always there, that any American, not to mention countless people who aren't American, can instantly relate to. And like Raymond Chandler or Ross MacDonald, they rewrite it. They take the basic element of the story and they create real mysteries out of them, murder mysteries out of them. And this sense that because the identity of Gatsby is an invention, just like the country is an invention, well, Gatsby is in our hearts. We have the right to invent him. And I think it's this constant sense of adaptation and reinvention that has kept the book alive. I mean, we're talking about a book that was published 95 years ago. Soon it's going to be 100 years. And yet we're still talking about this book. People are still reading this book as if it's a central story, as if, as I talk about in the book, it's one of those books that even if you've never read it, you have.
That's right.
You know the story, you know what it's about, you know the contours, you know the essence, you know what the punch is, and it's become a free-floating metaphor that everybody can and everybody should adapt to their own purposes. I think it's that sense of freedom in the story that people feel when they're confronted with it, that allows them to say, this is my story too, and I'm going to tell it my way, that has kept the book alive.
I think of Robert Johnson when he describes waking up in the morning and the blues is up with him, walking and talking like a man.
Right.
And says, well, give me your right hand. It seems to me that walking and talking blues that greets Robert Johnson in the morning is not unlike Jay Gatsby. William S. Burroughs and Ishmael Reed have both, in separate interviews, talked about how this novel actually is a walking, talking spiritual entity in American life. And you talked about it being rewritten and brought back in and out of focus. I think of Theodore Dreiser around the same time in American Tragedy, George Eastman and Angela Vickers, especially as portrayed in the film version by George Stevens. But could you explore that a little further about how the centrality of Gatsby has offered itself as an axis for so many other works of American art?
Yeah. One of the songs that plays in Baz Luhrmann's version of the book, or maybe you could say Baz Luhrmann's version of all the other Gatsby movies, however you want to depict it, is Lana Del Rey's song, Young and Beautiful. Will you still love me when I'm no longer young and beautiful? Which could be a question that anybody in the book itself asks of himself or herself or other people. And this song plays through the movie. You first hear it, I think, as a kind of foxtrot by a band all dressed, an African-American band all dressed in yellow suits, I think. And then you hear it sort of drifting over the water as just an air. And it's never fully sung, but it is like a half-conscious dream floating through the entire movie. That, to me, that song is an adaptation, is a distortion, is a taking over of the book, saying, this is my story too, and this is how I'm going to tell it. In Ross MacDonald's novel, The Galton Case, he takes someone who is pretending to be somebody else, but that's who the person he really is. He just doesn't know it. It's this incredible back and forth rug pulled out under your feet novel. And MacDonald, throughout his life, talked about how, there was one American novel, and it was The Great Gatsby. And he said it is everybody's novel. As not even thinking about who hadn't read it, who read it and didn't like it, who didn't care. He said, it doesn't matter. That's irrelevant. It's yours anyway. And he talked about trying to get at the heart of the story over and over and over again. It was essentially what his literary life was all about. And so there is this way in which it is a song that people are attracted to sing. I think of Brian Ferry in Babylon, Berlin. that great TV series about Berlin in the 1920s, in the Weimar period, when you have, gangs of, you have street battles between communists and Nazis, where the whole country is beginning to crack. There are all these terrible conspiracies going on. And there's a nightclub where so many of the assignations of various characters take place. And in that nightclub, at one point, Brian Ferry, who's my age, who's 75 this year, so this is a few years ago, maybe he's 72 or 73, but he's up there on the stage singing. And he's singing in his own being. In other words, he's singing as an old guy who was born in the 1860s or 1850s. That's who you're seeing. And he is singing from the 1920s. He's trying to embody the 1920s. So much of this has to do with the 1920s. There are certain periods in American life when the country has gone through something so traumatic. I hope we're not in that kind of period now. We very well may be. Something so traumatic that when it breaks usually because of a war, everything is new again when the war is over. People let their breath out. It's like they haven't taken a breath in 5, 6, 15 years. And something, oh, I'm still alive. I can't believe it. Now I can do anything. Now I can be anyone. Nothing can stop me. And that's the spirit of the 1920s that is animating Fitzgerald in this book. And there's this sense that not only can I become a new person, I have to. There's a way in which the Declaration of Independence is not only the central poem or the central document or the epic, the national epic like Song of Roland or any other traditional society's national epic. It is a statement of freedom. It says that we are all free to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. But it's not just that, because to some people, it's a burden. It's a charge. It's a directive. You must, if you consider yourself an American at all, a free person of any kind, you must pursue life, liberty, and happiness in your own way. You must create yourself. You must bring the world to you. You must remake the world in your own image as you walk through it, even if no one ever notices you. So it's a burden too. And I think the great Americans that we so often look back to, look toward, whether it's Martin Luther King, whether it's Abraham Lincoln, whether it's Frederick Douglass, whether it's Emily Dickinson, these are all people who took up this charge and who said, essentially, I'm not who I'm supposed to be. I'm not who people think I am.
I'd like to pivot from there to Daisy. And we spoke a few moments ago about Gatsby as an archetype, and I'd like to sustain that a bit with focus on her. When I think about Daisy and especially her meaning within Gatsby's life, I see another archetype emerge, something that is very familiar in a poem by Charles Baudelaire simply titled Beauty, or Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Oval Portrait, or Alban Berg's Lulu, where the mystery of her beauty that Gatsby perceives in his attempt to possess it, if you will, becomes his own undoing. The fact that he won't let it go, as we say, leads him to his own death. Now, this relationship between the quest for his own personal identity and the way that it's inexorably woven with his desire to possess her as this beloved but also object of beauty is also his death. Could we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's a way in which Gatsby has created Daisy in the same way that he has created himself.
Right.
She becomes this iconic figure. Now, Leonardo DiCaprio, when he's talking about his own character in the movie, says, "What happens when he, finds her again? Is she really going to live up to his fantasies
Right.
that he's been nurturing and fetishizing for 5 years? Is it going to be a terrible disappointment? Is it just going to fall?" And this doesn't happen in the movie, but it's DiCaprio trying to figure out his own character and how he might live out the story in his own life, or we could just say real life. Daisy is, and I write very little about her because to me she is such a vapid figure. And I think to Fitzgerald, she's extraordinarily vapid. At the end, it's not just Tom, but it's she who go off to live their lives of vast carelessness. They never think, they never care. They leave destruction in their wake. And it's not that someone else can pay for it. It's just that they're not going to. It doesn't matter to them if anything is ever rebuilt, whether it's a personality or a building. So, when you look at the people who played Daisy in the movies, can't really see the one that was made in 1926. It's lost. But the version from 1974, from 1949, with Alan Ladd as Gatsby, you've got someone who's got the features of a TV actress. She can't really hold the screen. It's like Tina Fey. Tina Fey is not a movie actress. She can't hold the screen. Everything you see her in is a TV show. She's a TV actress. And that's what happens in 1949. In 1974, you've got Mia Farrow, who doesn't really seem to be all there, seems to be, living in some other house. And then you've got Carey Mulligan in the Baz Luhrmann movie. And none of these people ever really make a claim on the story. It's just not there. It's not their story. It's not just that they're a figment of Gatsby's imagination. It's that when you're in love, when you love somebody, they are beautiful to you. And you see things that no one else could ever see, including the person yourself. And that's who Daisy is in the novel. She is not just a figment of Gatsby's imagination. He is in love with her. And so everything he sees is golden. Doesn't matter in the novel, she has dark hair. It's, there's a glow around her, and it's the same glow to him as he actually physically, psychologically exudes around other people. That's, how Nick first describes him when Nick, both in the Baz Luhrmann film and in the novel, when he first encounters Gatsby, he feels like someone is seeing him, Nick, for the first time as he had always wanted to be. In other words, he didn't have the nerve, he didn't have the bravery to reinvent himself or just invent himself as Gatsby did. But Gatsby looks at him, and suddenly Nick feels like a person he never had the courage to be.
Yes, yes. Before we turn our attentions to questions from our audience, I did want to mention a couple of books from Greil Marcus that Peter was talking about earlier that are either back in print with the Manchurian Candidate from BFI, or this extraordinarily lavished illustrated edition of one of the few books of the last 50 years that I think can genuinely be described as an American classic, Mystery Train. And Grail and I will be talking more about Mystery Train in the coming months for SF MoMA. But
I have to say, there's still something a little strange when you hold up that book Mystery Train, which was just a little 200-page book that I wrote in 1975. And here it is, this gargantuan elephant. And, you know, I play with that book. There are new editions every 7-8 years, have been now for 45 years. And it gets longer and longer and longer. And yet, to me, it's just still this little book.
I'm looking forward to more conversation about this particular book, but I should share with our audience that the illustrations in the folio edition are just absolutely amazing, and you were involved at each step of that development of the new format. Yeah.
No, I wasn't. I simply said, go ahead, do whatever you want.
Oh, wow.
And they came up with something terrific. But no, it was all them.
Oh, good. Well, Greil, what do you think? Should we take some questions?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure where to look for that.
Well, I have to go to the Ask a Question device here.
Yeah.
Well,
That's I don't see any. Peter, do you have a grip on that?
Yeah, if anybody would like to ask a question, type it in.
Oh, I see. Well, in the meantime, between time, while we're waiting for a question, I have a particular quote that struck me from William T. Vollmann that seems very closely woven in with the themes that we've been talking about. And this comes from his book, his nonfiction book, Writing Toward Everywhere. I believe in the American myth that it is both admirable and even possible to devote one's life to a private dream. The probability of failing oneself, either through laziness, incompetence, or bad luck, or else, worse yet, through dreaming what one only imagined one desired, is terrifying. All the same, you have no more obligation to public dreams which dreamed you wrongly. Vollmann's statement here seems very relevant to Gatsby, and I'll put it to you in a different question. Was Gatsby's dream his own? Or was he dreaming a dream that America had inscribed that he ought to be this person in order to have the things that he wanted? Was it his desire? I'm just speculating a bit here and curious about your thoughts.
Well, I think it's very much that. That's what I was trying to say about the Declaration of Independence, that it passes on a burden or a challenge or a dare to you. Can you live up to me? Can you live up to this promise? Can you live it out in your own life? Because most of us, we don't think of ourselves. We don't live our lives as if we're creatures of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Do you go through your day pursuing happiness? And happiness, not just feeling good or, having a couple of drinks or, knocking around with friends or whatever might make you happy, but a sense that the world is in the right place and that you are part of it, that the world is in balance and that you know who you are and where you are. It's a different kind of happiness. It's a sense of being at home, being where you deserve to be and where you should be. I think that's much more what Jefferson meant by the pursuit of happiness. He didn't mean, riches. He didn't mean, it's like Bruce Springsteen said that, and maybe it's easy for him to say since he has these things, but he said, the houses and the cars, that's not the American dream. He said those are the booby prizes. He said the American dream, has to do with becoming who you're supposed to be, who you want to be. it is, I think, more a dream that is, I'm not even sure I like the word dream, a philosophical identity that is inscribed upon you. When you read through the last pages of The Great Gatsby and the last 20 pages or so, as I said before, when you get to the end of the book and Fitzgerald talks about the last green breast of the green breast of the new world, the Dutch sailors sight, the last dream, sort of commensurate with man's capacity for wonder. You realize that this sense of the green light and the fresh green breast of the new world, in the last 20 pages, the green light that Gatsby looks out toward, that symbolizes to him everything he wants and can't quite have. These things are brought together by Fitzgerald very, very carefully, very musically. So at the end of the book, you may realize that the green light that Gatsby gazes upon at the end of Tom and Daisy Buchanan's dock isn't just a green light of something he wants. The green light is America itself. And it is something that is constantly receding, that we never totally get our hands on, that slips away from us. And it's always back there. The face is always there, looking at you, saying, "You want me. I want you. Can't you reach me?"
In this vigil that Gatsby keeps as a part of the ritual of his daily life is part of the discipline of that pursuit, a kind of patriotism. Yeah.
I don't know. I think when he looks at that green light, he's in a trance. There is that ghostly moment when Nick sees him looking at the green light, raising his arms as if he, is actually trying to reach out across the bay and touch it, and believes that in some way he can. Some people will find that sentimental nonsense. Some people, it will break their hearts. And it's a great challenge to take something that is at once that sublime and that corny and put it on the screen and make you believe it. And that's what Baz Luhrmann was able to do. What he did with The Great Gatsby that other people had been afraid to do. People cut the story down, they omitted stuff and all of that. That's what you do when you adapt a movie, adapt a novel. But Luhrmann invented things. He made stuff up. He put stuff in the movie that isn't in the book. He has dialogue. He has character development that's not in the book. And at the very end of the film, Nick is standing there alone in front of Gatsby's abandoned house, and he's standing on the first steps of Gatsby's own dock, and it's raining like mad, and he's just looking out at this green light of the Buchanan's own abandoned house. Everyone is gone. Everyone is dead. There's nothing left. All the summer people have gone. All the tourists have gone. All the houses have been closed down. There's nobody there at all. And he sees Gatsby at the end of the dock, Gatsby who's already dead, staring at him as if to say, "Did you understand? Did this change you? Are you a bigger person now?" And you look and you see in this pouring rain, and it's not raining on Gatsby. It's not raining on him because he's dead, but because in some deeper way, he is a golden figure on whom it cannot rain. And that's putting something into the book that wasn't there. That's what you have to do. That's what has to happen to a book for it to stay alive, for it to seem ours as much as belonging to the people of its own time. And Gatsby doesn't have an own time. I mean, it's the energy in the book, the philosophical conflict in the book is the 20s. The 20s is there. All of the sense of discovery and invention that the 20s are all about culturally and politically too, is in that book. But it's not somehow ever in the 20s when we pick it up now. You know, people who go through Gatsby revivals and dress up in flapper clothes and stuff like that, let's just say they're not reading the book.
In thinking about contemporary cinematic images, rereading Gatsby, doing my homework and preparation for this very generous interview. Again, thank you, Greil, for.
Oh, come on, Justin. Thank you.
I was struck by those famous closing sentences in that image of the rower, and I immediately saw again those last frames from the film The Last Black Man in San Francisco, where he's out there under the bridge and you don't know if he's rowing into the bay or going out into the Pacific. You don't know, for good reason. And I realized, there it is.
And it's so much better that
Mm-hmm.
way than it is in the novel. It's one of those novels that has like one sentence too many. I think ultimately that we beat on boats against the current, borne ceaselessly into the past. I think that is not good. I think that is telling us something we don't need to know, that we've already heard. It's gilding the lily. It's calling attention to itself. I think, I don't like that. But your description of the end of The Last Black Man in San Francisco is somebody taking that image, taking it to heart, and putting it in a different situation, in a different story, and having it explode with passion and conflict and doubt in a way that it doesn't in the book. So great. That's one of the things, that's what I'm trying to argue, that keeps the book alive, is that its imagery is constantly being taken by other people, and things that are dormant in the book are brought out by other people, whether it's John Collins, who conceived of and directed Gats, whether it's Baz Luhrmann, whether it's Ross MacDonald, any number of people.
I felt very strongly a connection there as well with Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard, when William Holden is shot in the pool, and that famous opening sequence where you see him narrating his own death, but from the face down, looking into the bottom of that pool, and thinking again of Gatsby shot in his own.
Every dead person in a swimming pool is Gatsby.
Yeah.
James Crumley wrote a great detective novel called The Last Good Kiss, and it ends with the heroine, this tortured person, shot to death and floating in a swimming pool with bullet holes in her back, and it's a horrible ending. I tried to reread the book a couple of years ago when I was working on this book, and I got to about the last 10 pages, and I just put it away because I knew it was going to be too awful and too painful. I just couldn't read it again. And there's no way that Jim Crumley was not saying there's a way in which that scene isn't as passionate as it should be. It isn't as hurtful as it should be. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make that scene what it should have been. And God, he does.
You know, the Wilson's gas station, the filling station where Myrtle Wilson is driven over. Every time I read that, I can't help but see James Cain's filling station with Cora and Mr. Papadopoulos there from The Postman Always Rings Twice.
I don't think there's, the remotest chance of that being accidental.
It's right there.
But I had never thought of that. But you're right. Everywhere you look, when you get into a certain mood, you see people not stealing, not appropriating, but saying, okay, let's take this element of the story and see how it plays out.
Even the relationship the Wilsons have is very similar to Cora and Papadopoulos.
God knows.
Yeah.
God knows.
And so I see here at the bottom of the screen and ask a question. It says there's a number 5, but I don't see where the text is. I'm going to click on that.
Okay, what is the best film adaptation from the novel? Baz Luhrmann's 2013 Great Gatsby. Nothing is close. Where do you see this book in the stream of your other books directly about music? I don't know. This is a book I wanted to write. All my books are books that something itches at me and I can't quite let it go. Yet there's a way in which, when in a couple places in the book, I write about songs. I write about Joe Roll Morton's Mamie's Blues, and I write about Skip James's Hard Time Killing for Blues. One from 1931, Skip James, the other from 1939, Jolie Roll Morton. There's a way in which I felt I'm home again. It was so much more comfortable writing about music. That's natural to me. Everything else, I have to put myself in another self. You said that for Nick, when Gatsby looks at him, Nick, feels as if he's seeing himself the way he wants to be for the first time. It makes me think that Gatsby's gift is making everyone feel as though Gatsby is in love with him or her. That's a wonderful way of putting it. Why was Luhrmann's Gatsby not better received critically at the time? What did critics understand or misunderstand about it? Well, Baz Luhrmann has always been a controversial figure. He takes classics and he vulgarizes them. He puts people in them that aren't supposed to be there. When he does Moulin Rouge, he uses contemporary music. When he does The Great Gatsby, at all of Gatsby's great parties, you're listening to hip hop. You're listening to fabulous, loud, expansive, world owning hip hop, and it seems completely right, or at least it did to me. So people say, "Who is this Australian? Who is this foreign sex trafficker kidnapping this innocent flower of American democracy?" There is that, and there's some people who just can't stand to see what they consider a little delicate porcelain statue smashed and see big faces come out of it. I guess, I could go on. I write a lot about that. I quote a lot of the reviews. It's kind of fun because they're so blind. You mentioned a moment of clarity that happens when one finds out that they're trapped in a prescribed identity, which they may not only disagree but abhor. And I find myself up against this, and my question is, how does one embrace one's true self and walk away from the it with grace and conviction? Expatriotism is presuming one was a patriot to begin with. I don't know about that. I think everyone is born a patriot in the sense that he or she is part of a country, part of a society, part of a legacy, part of a history, that it's theirs to accept or reject. It's theirs to transform and further, or to retreat or to destroy. I think there's a way in which patriotism is something you embrace or you fight against. That's how I see it. Let's see. We have more. That's what I see here. I'm going to close this so we can see each other. Well, that was a lot of fun. I hope it was fun for people. I hope the technical difficulties weren't too great.
Yeah, sorry about that. Well, thank you, Greil. Thank you, Justin, and thank you all for joining us. As always, you can buy a book by pressing that little green button at the bottom of the screen. And we hope to see you again soon. Next week, we've got John Freeman coming up. Also, a whole bunch of other programs. Just go onto our website, check it out. We're also on Instagram, on Facebook, Twitter, and so on. Gentlemen, have a great evening, and thanks for everyone being here. And be safe and be well.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.